It's my absolute honor to introduce Ms. Andrea Wojnar, Resident Representative, UNFPA India and Country Director, Bhutan. Just a quick few lines about her. Prior to her arrival in India, Ms. Wojnar was UNFPA representative in Mozambique, Senegal, and country director for Gambia. In a career spanning almost 4 decades, she has been at the forefront of programs that have focused on the rights and health of women and girls, giving a voice to youth and adolescents. She's a strong believer that when people are availed of opportunities, and when they are healthy, educated, and they are able to exercise their rights, individuals and societies flourish. So our keynote speaker for today, Ms. Andrea Wojnar, truly humbled and delighted that you are here. Over to you. Let's give a big round of applause for Ms. Wojnar. We have about 20 minutes for this session, and Ms. Wojnar would speak for about 15 minutes, and she would love to take questions from the audience. So maybe Anish will just give you a hint when we are close to 15 minutes, and we'll open it up then. Floor is yours. Thank you.
So namaste. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Delhi. For those who have come from afar, yes, we do start late here. I'm also adapting to that. My whole career has been mostly in Africa, where we start when the cock crows, and that's usually about 5:30. So I'm glad everybody's here and awake and ready to go today. I'm really excited about this conference because I learned a new term, equiverse, and I really like it. And I really love the notebook you gave with the drawing on it, because I think that shows beautifully what we're trying to achieve when we talk about equity in all its intersectionality. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. And it's hard for me to speak about some of these things because I don't want to come across as a fraud. But I really had to try hard to understand what shaped my interest in gender and gender equality, because I came from a really fortunate setting. My parents were second-generation immigrants of non-English speaking parents from Poland who emigrated to the US and worked in the knitting mills in Massachusetts. Both my parents worked as public school teachers, so somewhere in the middle, not terribly high, not completely low. And yet, I was expected to set the table every night at home, but my brothers were expected to clear the table and wash the pots and pans. My mother maybe prepared dinner, but just as often, my father would get up early in the morning and start the crock pot, the slow cooker, cutting the vegetables and the meat and whatever, and putting it in so that dinner was ready when everybody got home at the end of the day. And my 4 brothers and I were held to the same standards of academic excellence. So growing up in this environment gave me a distinctly different outlook on what my role as a woman should be. And I'm not really sure where it came from in my parents, because they certainly didn't come from terribly equitable surroundings, but it was there. And somehow I never really questioned that. And it served as a font of confidence that got me through the first 3 decades of work, mostly on the African continent. I would often find myself as the only woman at decision-making tables of the International Red Cross, and I would be surrounded by mostly middle-aged African men. And yet, I would also be the US Peace Corps director in liaising with mostly male figures in government and community officials, whether it was in Tanzania or West African countries or even Nepal. But yet I never thought too much about gender. I just thought about getting to win-win. What's in it for them and what's in it for me, and how can we get there? So it didn't hit me too much. And yet there came a point, sort of a deep shocker, if you will, that really changed my heart and my mind. And I realized my gender blindness was a bit flawed. And this was around the issue of female genital mutilation. I don't know if everybody here knows what that is. It exists in many forms, type 1, 2, and 3, from the least horrible to the most horrible, and I'll let you look up the details on Google. It's highly prevalent in Africa, but also in the Middle East, in Asia, and even here in India. At first, I thought this was a cultural tradition that shouldn't be tampered with. And I felt as a Westerner, it was not my place to go in and tell those people what their culture should be. So I kind of kept away. But then I personally got to know so many women and girls who had been cut and who had difficulty and agony with every menstruation, with every urination, and with every sexual intercourse act. Or obstructed labor when they were giving birth, that led to a debilitating lifetime of fecal and urinary incontinence. Just imagine, all day long for your entire life, you are incontinent. It also put the mothers and the babies at risk of dying. There was also the mental side, the depression, the anxiety, the post-traumatic stress disorder that this caused. And I realized that wait a second, women have a right to the highest attainable healthcare standards possible, even if we just talk about it from the health angle. And those subjected to FGM have this right denied to them. It's pure and simple, along with all the other violations of their human rights. And it's all linked to skewed gender norms and women's role in society. There's nothing in the Quran that talks about cutting. There's nothing medically useful about it. There's just no reason for it. There's no justification. It's pure social norms. So that was a real turning point for me. I'll be completing 2 years in India soon, February 14th. I always say Valentine's Day was my beginning of my love affair with India. Although, by the way, I studied here at Bangalore, India Institute of Management 30 years ago. So I didn't know I'd be back, but here I am. And I'm deeply inspired by the dynamism that I see and by all the things that Ipsita mentioned earlier, women in education, economy, employment, economics, politics, entertainment, science, even sending India to the moon. And many of these notable and privileged women are here today, and that's why I'm so inspired and so energized. Yet in my role as UNFPA representative, I also see women leaders from the most disadvantaged sections of society who are as brave and smart as any other. And they're extraordinary leaders in action and in the making. And they're breaking down those social norms every day. And they straddle the 4 dimensions that you have outlined for the conference. So I want to give you some examples. Imagine adolescent girls in Orissa fighting for equity at home and in the community, to grow up as equals, to have mobility and safety in their environments, to participate in their community's response to disaster. These girls are trained as disaster response leaders and as first responders to coastal flooding and all kinds of other emergencies. This calls for tremendous mindset changes for the girls, but also for the community. And UNFPA is leading this work. Women and girls are also leveraging education for equity by breaking barriers and taboos on adolescent sexuality and life skills. We all know adolescence is a foundational time where our ideas are really shaped and where regressive social norms take hold. And by the way, that's worldwide. That's not just in India. Through the use of digital technology, we're unpacking adolescent sexuality and helping girls and boys discover themselves by asking questions and getting accurate answers in a private, safe space. We're also supporting equity in employment in an everyday fight by midwives who are newly introduced to India and health workers who are taking over spaces from doctors who are not always required or aren't even available for deliveries. Or imagine the norm-breaking work of 60 disadvantaged female sanitation workers who appear every morning on the streets of Patna in crisp uniforms and helmets and operating heavy sewage and sanitation machinery. We have the full backing of the Patna municipality and the wider ecosystem that these women are rewiring the mindsets, their own and those of the community. So I'm sure today's speakers are going to raise many important aspects of what is needed to create an equiverse. But I wanted to raise one that I'm not sure will come out, and that's from my perspective as representative of the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency. Women at all levels must first and foremost enjoy bodily autonomy and physical safety and participate fully in decision-making spaces from the bottom to the top. So let me unpack this with some small personal experiences. I found myself in this really odious situation about 10 years ago. An ambassador with whom I had interacted at a public event, and I had discussed an idea and wanted to continue the exchanges. So he came to my office, and during the interaction, he propositioned me and invited me to a hotel. Yeah, digest that one. And imagine my shock and dismay that this professional colleague, a diplomat representing his nation, sexually harassing me in my own office space. I quickly found an excuse to leave the meeting, asked my assistant to see him out. But to this day, I'm a bit traumatized by it. It's such a small thing. I wasn't physically harmed. And we all know the physical abuse that women go through. But yet, it's traumatic. And what it says is even accomplished women in their own spaces are not safe. And we're not free from the destabilizing impact of this kind of harassment. And it's not conducive to effective labor force participation. So that's why I'm making this point. Something as simple as sexual harassment impacts the entire chain of productivity in India and elsewhere. Physical and mental safety has to also be accompanied by rights and choices. And a woman should decide if and when to have sexual relations, with whom, when to initiate, whether to use contraceptives, and to seek health care when needed. And unfortunately, I've met too many girls in India and other countries who are forced to have sexual relations, who are forced to have children, who can't stop until they have a boy child. So, and many who almost died because they weren't allowed to seek health care. Family resources were not going to be used. So these are the basic conditions for anybody to to chart a life trajectory. If you don't have control over your own body and your own fertility, then how can you be educated? How can you pursue a career? These are still very simple things, even within upper class families. So I'm lucky I get to work on these issues as UNFPA representative and help others end these privations for women in India. So what I want to say is, if we want an equiverse, we need to invest in the sexual and reproductive health of women. We need to listen to them at all levels, and we need to make sure that they are free physically and psychologically from abuse. We all have a role to play in this, and while my somewhat gender-privileged beginnings may have given me a confidence, not everybody has enjoyed that. So it's up to us to help everybody build their mindset, their confidence, their openness, and their openness to understanding, like that epiphany moment for me about FGM, what all those other women are going through, and what it's going to take to raise them up. As I close my remarks, I want to challenge you. The United Nations has given a clarion call for a decade of action for sustainable development. And India is at the epicenter. You all know India reached 1.4 billion people, overtook China in March, has the largest youth population, the largest female population in the world. 1.4 billion, of which half are women. So by your actions, by our actions, we can change the face of the world just by sheer numbers. If India succeeds in achieving sustainable development and gender equality through Nari Shakti, the world succeeds. So may the force be with us, and thank you very much. Sure, you want me to stay here?
Yes.
Yeah?
I have a question. Hello, I'm Dr. Jagdish Shivahari, professor and ex-scientist ISRO. My question, why is gender analysis critical for sustainable development initiatives? I repeat the question, why is gender analysis critical for sustainable development initiatives?
Gender analysis. Yeah, you're talking to the evidence and data aficionado here. We can't really imagine sustainable development if we don't use a gender analysis. And for that, we need disaggregated data. We also need disaggregated data by disability. And here in India, we need it by caste, we need it by religion, because the fact of the matter is, if we don't know where the lags are, if we don't know where the lack of access to services or to education are, then we can't address them. It's as if those people don't exist. And it's the same with gender. It's as if women don't exist if we don't have that data. Take something as simple as healthcare. Most of the research on heart attacks and stroke is about men. And yet, I think we all know that the symptoms present very differently in women. But we've all been trained to think, oh, my arm goes dead, oh, I'm feeling a chest pain here, because those are the symptoms in men. Women won't seek help. And so this is why it's so important to have this gender analysis. I also just invite you to look at the statistics. The countries that have the greatest gender equality enjoy the greatest peace and development, sustainable development.
Thank you very much. Very much.
We take one more question. Is there another question? Yeah.
Good morning. Ma'am, I wanted to, just say that we are always looking outwards for solutions, that women have to be educated, women have to be well informed, and all the limitations that women are working with and against aren't considered enough. In my own experience, I think, people who have been educated, people who have got the opportunities and so-called have broken the, so-called glass ceiling, they somehow in society become limited by their privilege. So in my view, unless housework and caregiving is monetized, there is no equity happening. What would you say?
I would say absolutely. We're on the same train. We do a lot of work at UNFPA and with the government on something we call national transfer accounting. And it's about taking into account the value of mostly women's work, housework, and trying to monetize that in economies. And we've been doing this for almost 20 years now, and trying to understand what is the value of that. It's not for nothing when you get a divorce that the value, the contribution of the woman to the household is taken into account. There's no way the working male spouse could have gotten where he was with all that, without all that help, right? So it needs to be taken into account and valued, and valued.
Yes, sadly, but the laws in India are still very badly skewed against women. And I can give you n number of instances of, women fighting for an equal share and not getting it.
Absolutely. For me, one of the biggest strategies that we have embarked on is positive masculinity, promotion of positive masculinity, where everybody gets to win-win, where men are confident, where men are relaxed, where men don't need to exercise violence or abuse or domination over women and others in order to feel comfortable and happy in society. So I think it's a mindset change for men, but I also think it's a mindset change for us.
Please, I just wanted to add to that while of course we should be monetizing housework, I think importantly, and sitting on an all-male table here, that men should learn how to do housework and participate in that. I think we will never have gender equality till men learn. It should stop being women's work. I want to take issue with that. It has to become everybody's work. It is everyone's home, these are everybody's children, and everyone should work inside the home, outside the home, and that's the way we will achieve gender parity.
I couldn't agree with you more, but I would just like to end before I leave with one question. How many of you taught your sons to clean and cook? Very good, because that's the future. Thank you.